Hello class, this is Lydia Gan again, and today I'm doing a video on chapter 4. Chapter 4 is about production and about cost and revenue. There will be a lot of cost curves involved. So I hope by now you have already viewed the chapter 3 materials, and so I want to do a chapter 4 step for you today. And please, if you have any feedback, please send me email. I would appreciate it. So chapter 4, what we're going to cover is about production. And we'll get into some of the cost curves. So one of the key concept that I want to make sure that I emphasize is, a lot of time you hear people say, I'm making profit. And sometimes you hear people say, I'm maximizing my revenue. So really, these two are not the same. The revenue is not the same as profit. So when you talk about revenue, basically you're talking about unit price times quantity. For example, if you're buying a CD, let's say it costs $1 per CD, and you're going to Walmart and you're buying 10 CDs, so that will be 10 units times $1, so then you have $10. That would be the revenue to the retailer. You have just spent, $10. However, profit is not the same. Profit is usually from producer viewpoint. Well, they're both from producer's viewpoint, really, but profit is total revenue minus total cost. So this is your total revenue here. So in other words, when you talk about profit, you're not only looking at the revenue, which is P times Q, but you also look at how much cost that you put into producing that output, that particular CD, for example. So in this case, the difference between the two will be your profit. So I just want to make sure that I explain that part. And so that, let me write it out in English. So that will be total revenue minus your total cost. So let me erase this little thing here. So there are two types of costs that I also would like to stress here. The first one is known as economic cost, and the second one is known as accounting cost. So on a daily basis, most of you are familiar with what is accounting cost, because accounting cost basically is talking about trying to not say minus here. So explicit cost of doing business. So, however, when it comes to economic cost, you would have both, you have to take into account not only explicit cost, but implicit cost as well. I'll give you an example coming up. This implicit cost is the same as your so-called opportunity cost, like what you learned in chapter 1. So let's look at what is accounting cost or explicit cost of doing business. For example, if you are opening up a restaurant business, you're running a restaurant business, so then some of the explicit costs involved would be, you would have to pay your bill. You would have to buy raw materials, food, pasta, fish, meat, and vegetables for your customers. So that's your explicit cost of doing business, something that's on the obvious. And however, this implicit cost here, which is in the definition for what is economic cost, involve the opportunity cost. And so one example of opportunity cost or implicit cost of running a restaurant business would be like For example, since you're using a storefront, to run a business, and you could have rented out to other business and earn and collect rent from them. So that is your so-called opportunity cost. If you're not, using the store to run restaurant business, you could have rented out for other businesses and start collecting rent. So that's one example right there. Next, your textbook also mentioned production function and cost function. So basically, and again, I meant to mention it earlier. So your PowerPoint slides, please, when you go through this video, I think it will help a lot if you print out a copy of your PowerPoint slide, or you have a computer in front and you got two devices so you could have it simultaneously. Because I'm trying to follow as much as possible the concept that's presented in your PowerPoint slide. Okay, I'm going to erase this right now. So the next thing that I want to cover is about the production. So basically, what is production? So when you produce something, usually there's input and goes into producing something, and then you have your output. So for example, if you want to build a computer, your output is your computer, your input would be the labor and capital. So example here would be labor and capital, and output could be anything. Example we give is computer. So it could be a book you're producing, or it could be you're producing education. So in this case, the input will be professor, and that's the labor part, and capital will be, for example, a building, classroom, a physical classroom where you come to class. So there are two types of inputs. One is called fixed input, and the second one is known as variable input. So in the example I just gave your fixed input will be, for example, capital. Okay, and this typically is labor. So one good example would be if you are producing pizza, if you're making pizza. So you have a pizza store, and so this is the example here. So in your pizza store, you have oven to make pizza, and then you hire workers to work, to churn out all those pizzas that you could sell to your customers. So in this case, we would say the fixed input would be your capital, your variable input would be labor. So if you look out the window, you see, let's say, 20 customers outside, lining outside, trying to get in. So then in the short run, you will not be able to expand your input because that's fixed. And your input here will be like, for example, oven, to make pizza. And this would be the number of workers, variable input, something that you could change quickly. So if you see a lot of customers in demand of your pizzas, and so what you could do is you could increase the size of the labor by making them make, for example, like work additional hours, work overtime, or you could hire more workers. However, in the short run, you will not be able to go out and buy an oven because that costs money, and that takes time too. So in the long run, you could change that, but in the short run, basically we say you would have a fixed input, and typically that's your capital, or in the example that we look at, it would be your oven. And your variable input is something that you could change in the short run. Like as you see, the demand goes up, so you could hire more laborers to make more pizza out of your business. Okay. Okay, the next slide I look at talks about, so typically your production function looks like that. Okay, so this is your output. So that could be pizza, and this could be the number of workers here. So we say that this is your production function. And you could see it's increasing. It's on the increasing or rising trend. And you could also see that at the beginning, it's sort of like rising slowly at a decreasing rate. And then after some point, start increasing more sharply, or what we say increasing at an increasing rate or exponential rate. So one of the reasons for that is because we're experiencing this thing called diminishing returns. The concept of diminishing returns, I'm going to put 3 stars here, is very important in economics. So what that means is that if you have a fixed input, like in this case capital, and if you keep adding more variable input, at some point the additional input that you put in is not, yes, it will contribute towards higher output, but then the marginal input or marginal productivity that you put into producing more, it will eventually decline. So a good example would be like if you hire a farmer to work on let's just say 2 acres land, and a tractor and a farmer. So you have this fixed plot of land. So you got 2 farmers working here, and you have a tractor. Excuse me for my drawing, but that's the best I could do. This is 2 acres, 2 farmers, and a tractor. So, so a tractor will be, in this case, your capital. And then you have 2 farmers as your labor. So if you keep adding more farmers into this fixed plot of land, which is only 2 acres, at the beginning, they are very efficient with just 2 workers or even 1. There is so-called efficiency there, but as you put in or crowd in more and more farmers, let's say 10 more, or more than 10 into that fixed acres of land, like 2 acres, so pretty soon, it's going to get very crowded. So with the additional labor that you put in, the productivity that's put in is actually declining, because at the end of the day, they take a lot of break, and they bump into each other, elbow to elbow. So basically, at the end of the day, it's not efficient. So you're experiencing something that economists say diminishing returns. So this is a notion that I'm going to read the definition to you. You could also refer to your book, where there is a point at which if you keep on adding the resources, yes, it will increase your production, but then eventually it would decrease your production. The additional input that you put in would experience the so-called diminishing returns, or increasing at a decreasing rate. So I hope that's clear to you. You can always refer to the textbook. That's a very famous concept in economics, and you could probably find resources everywhere that explain that particular concept there. Okay, yes, there's an example that I could give on that. So I'm going to erase some of this and get on to the example. That will be on your slide number 9. I'm going to erase some of this. Okay, so on your slide number 9, what you could see is a table with numbers. So I'm just going to take a subset of number to illustrate this concept of diminishing returns to you. So this is a number of labor, and this is total output. And then you have the extra. Extra is the keyword here, output. Okay, or you could use the word additional, or you could use the word marginal. So they all means the same thing here. So here's the example here, and if you start out with 0 labor, of course the output is 0. And if you have 1 workers and produce 100 maybe computers, okay, so, and then if you have 2 workers, it will produce 317. And then if you have 3, you have 500 workers. So how do you calculate that marginal productivity or marginal or extra output there? So what you do is you take for the first unit, you will take 100 minus 0, so you have 100. For the second unit, you will say the second workers, the marginal productivity of the second worker, you will take the total productivity of the 2 workers, which is 317, minus the total output of productivity of the previous number of workers, which is 1. So in this case, it's 100. So this one minus that, so you have 217. And then the next one, I think you get the idea. So you do the same here. So the marginal productivity of the third worker in this case will be, you take the total productivity of 3 workers, which is 500, minus the total productivity of the previous number of workers, in this case is 2 workers. So 500 minus 317, you will have 183 there. So this will be your marginal productivity of 1 worker, marginal productivity of 2 workers, and this is marginal productivity of 3 workers. Okay, so I'm going to add the word here, productivity, because you might be able to understand that word better. So it's the same as your output here. So that's basically how you calculate the marginal productivity. And I think you need to know this concept because this is an important concept. We probably will ask you how to calculate questions on that on your quiz or test. Okay, the next thing that I'm going to cover is cost. So just like the input, you have fixed and variable input. For the cost, you also have fixed cost as well as your variable cost. So let's go back to our restaurant business. So if you're running a restaurant business, what are some of your fixed costs? Well, you will have to pay your utility bill. You would probably have to pay your phone bill. You have to pay for your rent. So that's something fixed. You know, every month you have to pay. So even if there's no customer coming to your restaurant, you still have to pay the bill. You still have to pay the rent. So that's your fixed cost there. What is your variable cost? Variable cost has got something to do with, like the cost of doing business as the number of your customers goes up. So for example, on a football day, the game, the day that we have a football game on at UNCP campus. So what happened here is the local restaurants will have a lot of businesses because fans who come and with their families, and so the restaurants business are doing better. So if they're doing better businesses, meaning that so they get more customers, so they would have to cook more meal. So cooking more meal means you have to have more raw materials like food, vegetables, meat, pasta, rice, what have you. So that's basically what it is. Although the fixed cost could also refer to fixture. Like for example, you might want to put in an aquarium in the restaurant to attract children. So this is some of the things that, or pinball machine, to attract kids while they're waiting to take the food for takeout. Other than the fixed cost and variable cost, there are other costs concept that I also would like to cover. And so the other similar concept would be what we call marginal cost. So marginal cost is very similar to this example you just look at, but we're calculating marginal output or productivity here. So we'll probably do one example later. And then you have this thing called average total cost. I'm using the short term here. And then you have average variable cost. And then you have your average fixed cost. So basically, your average total cost is the summation of your average variable cost plus average fixed cost. Let me draw a line here. Okay. So I'm going to present the cost curve now. And this is the part that could get very confusing because these cost curves are, there's just so many of them. So I'm going to try to do them and explain along the way. So basically in economics, when we talk about cost curves, they have different shapes. So this is your price on the y-axis, and this is your quantity on your x-axis or your horizontal axis. So usually what we start off with, we say there is this average total cost. And I like to use a term to explain, to describe it. So this is like your a soup bowl, like a bowl of soup, and at the bottom, or U shape if you like. So this is a minimum point of what we call ATC. And then I want to throw in an average variable cost. So remember, average total cost is a summation of both average variable cost and the average fixed cost here. So your average variable cost is typically also shaped like a U. So it shapes more like that, average variable cost. So if you look at your slide number 13, so that's where you see this graph here. And then you have a graph that kind of like come down and then becomes asymptotic. This is your average fixed cost. So you got 3 lines here. And then the next cost that I want to add on to it is the marginal cost. So marginal cost typically would cut. I'm going to revise this a little bit. So see how I can do it a little bit better. Okay, there we go. So right here. So that's a minimum point of your average variable cost. And the next thing I want to do is I would like to add on your marginal cost. So this is the important one. The marginal cost would be this guy right here. So when you do the marginal cost, you have to be very careful because typically a marginal cost shaped like a fishing hook. So what I do is it cut through the minimum point of ATC, average total cost, and a minimum point of average variable cost. And it's dropping at the beginning, which I explain later, and then eventually it rises. So it really shaped like a fishing hook, So that's how I describe to my students so they could remember better. So basically that's what it is. So what is marginal cost? So marginal cost is very similar to your marginal productivity that we look at, except we're looking at cost instead of output or productivity. So if you look at the next slide, which is slide number 14, there are some examples there. So I will try to illustrate some of the examples of how to compute certain values from some of this cost here. So I'm going to erase that. So let's look at your numerical example next on the slide number 14. So this is, there are quite a number of numbers here. And so I want to be sure to do a few examples for you because once again, we test concepts like that on your chapter quiz as well as on your weekly test there. All right, so let's start off with output. And then we have TVC. And then we have TFC. So TVC stands for total variable cost. TFC stands for total fixed cost. So these two add together, you will get total cost. So these are all the various columns that you see. And then you have a marginal cost. It has a star or asterisk there. That's an important one. And then you have your average total cost. Then you have your average variable cost. And then finally you have your average fixed cost. So once again, your average total cost is a summation of AVC plus AFC. So as you can see from here, and then of course you have the other one I could add on here. This is your TFC, and this is your TVC, total variable cost, total fixed cost. And if you add these two together, you would have your total cost. So total cost is total fixed cost plus total variable cost. Okay, so let's do some numbers here. Okay, so let's start off with the output. So if you're producing nothing, basically your total variable cost would be 0. But even if you're producing nothing, there's usually some sort of fixed cost being incurred. So like I said earlier, if you're opening up if you're doing a restaurant business, if no customer come by, there are still fixed costs being incurred. So that will be like you still have to have the lights on, in case some customer come in. You never know. So you still have to turn on the lights. You still have to pay your utility bill. You still have to pay your rent, regardless. So then the fixed cost in this case, we have an example of 8,500. So therefore, your total cost will be, let's call this column 1, 2, 3. So this will be 2 plus 3. Okay, and so TVC, total fixed cost, variable cost plus total fixed cost will be 8,500. And then there's nothing there. Okay, so let's call this column 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Okay, so next you're going to produce 100 units of output. And your total variable cost is 2,500, and fixed costs remain the same regardless of how many units you produce. So your total cost now is 11,000. Okay, the reason it is 11,000 is once again you take these two, column 2 and 3, add it together. So use your calculator if you would. If you add total variable cost and total fixed cost together, you get a total cost. Okay, here we also have the marginal cost now, because remember the marginal cost is the marginal cost of the first unit will be this number, total cost of the first unit, minus total cost of the previous unit. So if you take 11,000, minus 8,500, so then you actually will get, let's look at it, 11,000, 8,500, so you actually will get, okay, 2,500, and then if you divide by 100, basically you get 25, so that's how you got the 25 there. Okay, so I'm going to put 25 right here. And your average total cost, how do you get average total cost? You get average total cost by taking total cost divided by the number of units, or what you call output here. So with that example there, that will be your average total cost. So once again, your total cost is 11,000 divided by the output is 100. So therefore, you have 110 for your average total cost there. Okay, And then your average variable cost will be, you take your total variable cost divided by output. Okay, your total variable cost is 2,500. So 2,500 divided by 100, so you get 225. You get 25. Pages. So lastly, average fixed cost. There are two ways to find it. You could either take 110 minus 25 to get 85, or you could take your total fixed cost of 8,500 divided by 100 to get your average fixed cost. I'm going to write it down for you. So total fixed cost divided by output. So in this example, your total fixed cost is 8,500. 8,500 divided by 100, so you get 85. So that's the answer right there. So again, once again, to summarize, your average total cost is the summation of those two. 25 plus 85, so you get 110. And marginal cost, you have to derive that from the total cost. Okay, so once again, let me write it down. The marginal cost of the first unit would be total cost of the first unit minus total cost of the previous unit. So in this case, that would be 11,000 minus 8,500. So then you have 250. I think you get, a while ago we looked at it, I think you get 2,500. And then since you divide by 100, since this is, your output is 100, so then you have, so you get 25. The reason I divided by 100 is because, you know, it jumps, the number jumps per 100. So since it is per 100, you could treat it like 1. So therefore the answer is 25 there. Okay, your textbook may explain that a little bit. So that's the example that I'll give you, and then you could similarly derive other numerical examples in a likewise manner. So next I want to introduce the concept of revenue. So I think we already talked about it at the beginning of this video that marginal revenue, well, total revenue is price times quantity, and it's not the same as profit. So what is marginal revenue? So marginal revenue would be the same, you know, the change in total revenue between production of 2 units. So there are 2 market structures that you will study in the next chapter. I'm going to give you a little bit of preview now. So the 2 market structures that we will look at will be the perfect competition as well as imperfect competition. Okay. So if you look at perfect competition, this is 2 different types of market structure. So if you look at the perfect competition, you have the typical demand and supply curve. And this is the market. So in the example we look at on slide, let's see, number 16. So you will have the market for memory. It must be computer memory, you know, talking to. So this is the market graph or curve for supply and demand curve. And then if you look at the individual firm, or just one particular firm, and this is where your equilibrium price, equilibrium quantity is. And if you draw a line across, this is the price line, or the demand curve, or the marginal revenue or the price for the individual firm. because in this case we say that the individual firm takes price as a given, like a farming produce. Pretty much if you one out of so many thousands of sellers or producers out there, you do not have much influence on the price. So you are basically a price taker. You take price as given. So therefore the price line or the demand curve is horizontal or fixed, because you basically do not have an influence over the market. Whereas if you look at imperfect competition, so example of imperfect competition would be like monopoly, which we will study in the next chapter, or monopolistic competition. They're not the same, because monopolistic competition, which I will explain next video that we do in the next chapter, it's not the same. In the case of monopolistic competition, you have a lot of sellers, but in the case of monopoly, you only have one. For example, Microsoft is a good example of a software monopoly. Okay, so this is imperfect competition. So then your demand and marginal revenue curve is different. Because as you can see, the demand curve and marginal revenue for perfect competition individual firm is a horizontal line, because it is a price taker. But in the case of imperfect competition, the demand curve is typically downward sloping. And then you also have a marginal revenue curve that's also downward sloping. So I think that's all that I'm going to say here. And the difference between the two is that the marginal revenue, MR, stay constant as output goes up. So as you produce more and more units, your marginal revenue stays the same. But over here, you see a key difference here, because your marginal revenue is now downward sloping. So we say that your MR decline as your output goes up. So as you produce more and more units from 0 all the way to say 100, you could see that, your marginal revenue actually declines. So we're not going to do example, there are two more numerical examples, but the other things that I would like to stress here is all the goals of the firms, basically, I think we would agree that is to maximize profit. Yes. Not just maximize total revenue. Total revenue means, you try to increase the sales, but not necessarily the profit, because remember the difference between profit and total revenue is profit, you have to take into consideration the cost. Whereas total revenue is you look at how many sales, how many items have you sold, then multiplied by the unit price. Okay, so in the case of perfect competition, let's look at some of the features. So you would have many firms. So this is some of the features. You have many firms. And whereas in the case of imperfect competition, the feature would be you have only a single firm. One firm. And then over here we say, what kind of goods do they produce? They produce identical or same, or in some textbook it will use homogeneous. Identical, homogeneous, or same good. Like for example, if you're producing a wheat, if you're producing rice, commodity market, so typically apply to farming. If you're producing certain vegetables like tobaccos or sweet potato. So in the case of monopoly, we say there's only one firm here, and then you produce a unique good. So typically the good that you produce is very unique. For example, pharmaceutical companies produce certain cancer-curing drugs, prescription drugs. It's very unique. So they apply for patent. That lasts for 25 years or some. So Microsoft, for example, is a monopoly. It produces one of its kind, Windows, so operating system. So it has, this monopoly in the operating system. Okay, so the next thing that we want to talk about, I think I'm coming to a close here. What are some rules that we should observe, For example, we say the goal of a firm, whether you are a perfect competition or you are a monopoly, a monopolistic competition, your goal is always to maximize profit. And what is the criterion here for you to maximize profit? Usually is your marginal revenue must be equals to marginal cost. So this is very important. I think I'm going to give it 5 stars here. Okay, so that's your profit maximizing criterion. How do you know at what point to produce? So you should produce at a point where your marginal revenue is equal to your marginal cost. And that would hold true for any types of market structure, whether you're in perfect competition or whether you're in imperfect competition. So next I want to introduce a couple more criteria. So yeah, that's the first one there. And then the other one is if you want to prevent having a loss. So how do you know to prevent a loss? So this one, I'll have to write down some equations here. So let me erase some of this stuff here. So I think I would erase this part here. So typically your total revenue is P times Q. So your profit is your total revenue minus total cost. Okay, so in this case we say your total revenue is right here. So what I do is I sub in total revenue, and then your total cost will be in parentheses your average total cost times quantity. So mathematically what you do is you collect the terms together, P minus ATC, and then collect Q. So then you say P minus ATC is your unit profit. So what it is saying is that whenever that you produce something, you have to price it above ATC in order to be profitable. If you're break even, right, you're not making a profit, not making a loss, then P minus ATC would be 0. So that means your price is exactly equals to your average total cost. But wouldn't it be so much better if you price it above average total cost, so this number is positive, so you make a positive profit. Now, on the other hand, you will have a loss if your average total cost turns out to be higher than your price. So what that means is your price cannot even cover the average total cost. So you are in essence making a loss there. So not only that, we will go one step further to say that price should be greater than your average variable cost. because average fixed cost does not matter so much. So you will read in the book that fixed cost does not matter when it comes to producing more, because as you saw in the numerical example earlier, that the fixed cost stays the same no matter how many units you produce. You still have to turn on the light to run the business. But your variable cost, essentially, it's your marginal cost. That matters, because if you want to produce more, you would have to buy more raw materials, all that. So that's the one that affects your business, really. So therefore, eventually, you're looking at price is greater than average variable cost as one of the criterion for profitable, for your business to be profitable, that is. Okay, I think I think that's where I would stop, and then you would have a couple more examples, numerical examples, which I'm not going to go over, because you could refer to your book, and then there's also other videos that you could refer to. So I will stop right here, and so the next one I will work on the next chapter, which will be chapter 5 here. So please get started with working on your chapter quiz, after you view the video and read the book, and go over your PowerPoint slides. So try to keep up with the class. So thank you for listening. See you later.